Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jonah Cowell, CTO at Logs.io, and I'm joined by Anurag over at Calypta, and we're here to talk about this project, which hopefully many of you use. Anurag, can you give us a little intro about yourself and your role? And then we can dive into the discussion.
Yeah, awesome. First, thank you so much for having me. My name's Anurag. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Calypta, and we essentially are a company that is bringing enterprise readiness to Fluentd and Fluent Bit. These two great open source projects that we're going to talk a lot about today. My background: I've worked at Microsoft, I've worked at Elastic, so a lot throughout the observability space.
Nice. And I guess I know you have an interesting history in open source, both at Elastic and then after. Maybe you could tell us how you got involved beyond the companies I worked for and were involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So for open source, I actually happened to land on it by luck. So uh, coincidentally, it happened at Microsoft. So at Microsoft, there was this team called the Open Source Technology Center. And what Microsoft discovered back in the day was you can't just sell Windows. And this is in the Ballmer era, pre Satya Nadella, and they extended many of their monitoring products. So their System Center suite of products that went and actively managed, monitored, and helped provision Windows ecosystems. And they said, we need to be able to do Linux and Unix as well. And so tucked away in a small corner of that team was this open source technology center that did three small things at the time, which were Linux on Hyper-V, so all the drivers that would be upstream to the kernel. It would be all the Linux and Unix management with the System Center suite of products, and of course, Linux on Azure. So that's where I landed as kind of my first role as a product manager, someone in open source, and it just so happened that that team was very lucky in that once Satya Nadella came on, cloud became the focus. All of a sudden, everything was Linux. If you're going to be building systems at scale, most likely you're going to be choosing Linux. And so that was a great place to kind of start my career in open source, learn about licensing, learn about how large companies like Microsoft use and adapt it. And as part of that, one of the key initiatives we had there was looking at Azure and looking at moving some of these behemoth system center type products to cloud, and how do you do this all in the cloud. And so in 2015, we looked at, okay, monitoring is evolving to logging. Folks who are looking at APM, who are looking at specific alerts, they want to be able to do this in a cloud-based system. And as part of that, we needed a data shipper. And we had this new mentality where instead of trying to just go the Microsoft way, build everything ourselves, is there something that was already out there in open source? Was there something that was reliable, something that had a decent community adoption? And we found Fluentd. And so within a matter of a few months, we were able to go out and launch a brand new what we called Operations Management Suite agent for Linux for Linux, and it was with Fluentd. And that was actually my first exposure to the project. Was a great success story for open source and utilizing open source. We contributed a couple of things back. It's still out there, actually. So you go to Microsoft OMS Agent, you'll find all of the stuff that was done. That was kind of my foray into taking a project, utilizing it, launching a product with it. And from there, I just happened to grow more and more fond of this project, seeing how its potential could help users do things like save money, really solve these key issues around reliability and performance. And so I got invited from Treasure Data, which was the company that created the technology at the time, to come join them as they look to make an enterprise version of the product. So I left for Treasure Data after Microsoft, got to learn the struggles and wonders of enterprise open source, which was fantastic. And I think Treasure Data was going through a kind of a company growth period at the time, and we were excited to land a few customer deals, but the company was also focused on marketing analytics. So I quickly went to another place to learn more and more about this enterprise open source. And one company that, I think when folks look at enterprise or commercial open source today, Elastic is absolutely at the top of the list. And so that's where I headed next, this time focusing on the cloud side. So yeah, it's been quite a journey, but one that I'm continuing to be excited about every day. I love open source more and more. There's a lot of hot topics in open source these days, but yeah, all fun.
Yeah, cool. So just because you mentioned there were two interesting things. One is when you talk about Elastic and open source, like it used to be like a great example of that. And Red Hat is obviously another great example of a success story, and MongoDB and lots of other companies. But a lot of them are changing. I mean, look at MySQL, look at MongoDB, look at Elastic this year and what they've done with their licensing. They're not even open source projects anymore, which is kind of shocking that you would say 2 years ago, oh, Elastic's going to be not open source anymore. You'd be like, no, that's not true. They believe in this, but it changes, business changes the way that people think about giving away free software, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's probably a couple things that are really important to just the open source projects in general, which is one, the community building aspect of it. And this is where you're organizing events, you're giving folks really rich guidance and even support, help how to get started, how to get things going. And I think that's been something that regardless of what your license might be, whether it's source available, commercial, etc. I mean, another great example of this where just community building is like Splunk, right? Splunk has done a pretty fantastic job of its community, its Splunk answers. But yeah, as we look at the actual license piece, I think we're starting to see a trend where most of the large players are moving away from kind of the traditional permissive licensing model. Another one is Grafana. We're like, well, it's still OSI approved, but a GPL v3, and that's something where I think we'll see less and less permissive license going forward for companies that are thinking of commercial open source. Whether it's something like a BSL license, which is MariaDB's business source license, or just starting off as pure SaaS and trying to say, hey, all our other stuff is going to be under an AGPL or an SSPL type license, a server-side type license.
Yeah, but I mean, I also feel like if you build open source and then you build a compelling SaaS product, you don't actually need to create restrictive licensing on those pieces. And obviously, SaaS is the business model that everyone wants to go towards, and customers love it because it's seamless for them to do management and various other things. I mean, it's definitely a lot of interesting things going on in that side of things. I mean, speaking of which, and data collection, I always think of data collection as commoditized. I mean, it's an interesting, important part of the chain, but there's a lot of great choices for data collection out there. Obviously, I also like some other projects like Vector and various other things, but then as they get acquired, then you say, what's going to happen with this down the line? Is it going to be restrictive? And so that's the concern. But the data ingestion area is it's pretty interesting because you take a look at even the news yesterday with Cribble, and I know Clint, and maybe he's watching, so hi Clint, congrats on the funding. They got a huge round of funding and quite a valuation for a company that basically does telemetry ingestion. Were you shocked by that news yesterday, or were you?
Yeah, I think watching Cribble. Oh, a little bit of an echo there. Yeah, watching Cribble, it has been great because I think they have built this new category around data ingestion and pipelining, which is awesome because the more folks that learn about the capabilities, the more folks that will come and say, "Hey, we want a vendor neutral solution, something that's housed in a foundation that they can rely on." We're talking about all these open source projects. One of the best things about a foundation is that project can never change, right? You can take utmost confidence in having that and have a guarantee that the governance model, the way these projects are managed, and the future of that project will not be changing from anything permissive to something non-permissive. And I think that's definitely a great thing. So watching the success of others in the space building this category out, I think it helps float all boats with respect to what users want. How do we go in and influence this? And I do hope more users come and participate in the Fluent community, saying, "Hey, I saw this great feature over here. I want to go and work on this type of feature in this open source community." And yeah, we'll gladly accept folks in that.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. It's interesting. I don't think of it really as a new category because it's just part of getting data. It's not like groundbreaking, but using this technology to save companies money and make ingestion easier and more efficient for them, there's a lot of dollars involved in that. I mean, if you can, and what Cribble does, and obviously what people use all of these technologies for, is I'm sending all this data. How do I make it less so that I can pay less money to my vendors for storage, for various other things, which has a very clear value prop. If you can make that easier and better for users and scale that out, I think that's it's certainly worth paying for, especially if you give people a good user experience, customer success, all of the things around the company. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think part of it that's really interesting is like data and cost have always traditionally been aligned, right? If you ingest more data, you pay more, and it kind of makes sense from anyone who's thinking of it. Yeah, I'm paying for what I use, but I think we're getting to these inflection points within the industry where folks are realizing like, wow, I'm paying like 90% for debug logs, and I don't use any of that, and so now that equation that was so linear in fashion is becoming more of this change where it's saying, well, how much value am I gaining from this data? And that is not linearly related. It's more of a kind of a curve that falters off. So I think Cribble and others, yeah, it's definitely not anything new in a technology perspective, but perhaps what I would say is this new category is, can we make that value piece a little higher for the data that you already have? Enrich it, redact it, do whatever you might do, but do it at scale, distributed, and across thousands of systems. I think that's like you were saying, that's the value.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess you're a product manager, but you probably got a lot of hats at your startup. Can you tell me what you do with your time? Like, how do you divide it? And, you do a lot of product management things, but I'm sure you've got a lot going on that I don't see in the community side. So,
Yeah, I think as anyone who has started a company, or even many product managers will tell you that it's a role of many hats, just as part of itself. So for me, it could be anything from doing a lot of the backend community work, which can sometimes be forgotten, like the docs, or trying to repro some specific issues. And then from a company side, it can be things like our marketing, our messaging. How do we help build, or how do we identify some specific features that will provide enough value that users would want to use it. So for me, yeah, it's been whatever can help the business grow, and I'm sure many folks would answer the same way. That's what you got to do, right?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And are there other product managers over there? Are you kind of solo? I mean, what's the state of things over at Calypta?
Yeah. So my co-founder is the creator of Fluentd Bit, so Eduardo. So he's definitely the tech muscle behind building out things like community requests and delivering on how we look at just up leveling the projects into commercial type enterprise pieces. And then we also have a few folks who work on UI. We have folks who work on ops. We've actually been building out a lot of dev tools for the community. So things that you can use for free as you get started with Fluentd and Fluent Bit. Things like visualizing your configuration, validating your configuration. So if you are running into issues and you don't know why something's failing, the logs can be helpful, but we could also paste the config, run it for you, and just say, here's the XYZ things that are wrong. So all of those are available for what we've been building so far, and we've been building a team around that. But yeah, from product, that's myself for right now.
Nice, cool. So shifting over to the community a bit, because people I'm sure that are tuning in or listening later want to hear about what's new with Fluentd, Fluent Bit. What's kind of the hot button topic that you're driving or maybe interested in? I have a couple that I'm going to bring up in a few minutes, but I just wanted to hear your take on what's been going on.
Yeah. I think some topics are pretty persistent throughout every release we'll have. Those are definitely things like performance. We definitely get a ton of stuff about performance. Another big topic in the community that comes up regularly is custom plugins. How do we write those? How do we build those? So yeah, a good plethora of places where folks will say, hey, I love writing in Go. And for example, Fluent Bit is written in C, and people will write in Go and say, okay, I can write in Go and I can output to this particular backend. But the performance is not there. It's not as high as I would expect. And if you look at the underlyings, the C code transferring to Go code does have a little bit of an impact. Even Amazon, for example, they wrote a lot of Go plugins to start. And I think it's one of those ways we tend to push folks who want to build out a proof of concept. But as soon as you want to go to scale, that's when we say, okay, hey, you got to write C. And that's that bit of friction that we're trying to solve right now. There's a couple of solutions that we have in mind here for this. I think one of the hot topics in open source right now, and just in general, is WebAssembly. And this is taking things like Rust, like taking things like JavaScript or Python, whatever language you might have, compile it down to WebAssembly, and then have an interface with Fluent Bit that can run much faster than your traditional Go plugin. So this is something we'll be talking about at our FluentCon. But yeah, it's definitely one of those hot topics. How do we make it easier for users in that sense?
Yeah, and there was some discussion recently because OpenTelemetry incorporated Stanza into the collector, and in that discussion, which we recently had, it's because, well, one could argue why they did it, but generally because it's Go and the collector is Go and OpenTelemetry, it makes it easy to basically incorporate it in. And the fact that Fluent Bit is in C makes it harder, even though it's part of CNCF. So it's kind of like, Go is very popular in our space and in our market, but it's very like Bay Area focused. And as you get further away from the Bay Area in general, or the companies from there, I think Go has less mileage maybe than people give it, but it's certainly getting super popular in our space for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. Is we look at folks who are using Fluent Bit or contributing to Fluent Bit, there'll be folks all around the world, which is great. And while we do have folks say, C is hard, C is hard. On the opposite side, we also have folks who are saying, wow, C is my first programming language. And I'm super excited to see a project like this in the CNCF, something I can read the code and even try to contribute to. Oh, here's something that's going wrong. Here's something that I can assist with. So yeah, there's definitely a good balance there. And so if we can bridge that gap where you could write C, you could write whatever, C++, whatever you want, that I think is going to be really great for the community going forward for sure.
Yeah, I used to write a lot of C, but it's been a while. I don't think I've written any C in 20 years now, I want to say. But I used to do a lot more of that. I am particularly enthralled with this idea, and when I talk to customers and just other people in the community, they also like the vision of Fluent Bit and how you've been expanding beyond logging, because I think there's a lot of really cool things that you've started pushing and doing that make a lot of sense to me, just in terms of why do I have to have so many different agents to do data collection and forwarding that? And obviously open telemetry is the big project around that, but it's obviously concerned with logging metrics and traces, which is fine. But there's also the infrastructure layer where we care about metrics and logging. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what you're doing in the projects to evolve beyond just standard logging.
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier this year, we really started to kind of focus on what in production is going to be really valuable for our users. I mean, one of the old issues of Fluent Bit, it's like numbered in the few hundreds or right before 100, was about Prometheus. Hey, we want to be able to write to Prometheus, and as we saw the popularity of folks saying, hey, we want to have this single place for logs, metrics, and traces. Yeah, we thought that's fantastic idea. When those protocols become mature, we can integrate with it. And for our side, we said, well, we have a lot of folks in production today, and those users have been asking for things like Prometheus and being able to correlate that data, extract Prometheus metrics from their logs. And so we took a big stance of saying, why don't we go and push this into Fluent Bit and actually make it so that Fluent Bit could do remote write, it can do Prometheus exporter, and parts of Fluent Bit have actually been more on the data processing side as well. We introduced SQL stream processing about 2 years ago. We said, well, what if we could do the same thing with metrics? What if you could do like select all the metrics from the following stream, aggregate by error code count, and instead of sending it as a log, which we do today, let's send it as a Prometheus metric. So these were some of the scenarios where we were seeing a lot of users ask for it. We were seeing just a really high maturity of Prometheus in the ecosystem and open metrics. And we said, let's go integrate with it. Let's solve that production use case. But yeah, for us, we still like this vision of open telemetry, connecting all three of these data sources. And as that project evolves, we've always integrated with really top protocols or top ways to capture top schemas. So the beats. It's actually funny is the Elastic ecosystem when Fluentd was released about 10 years ago was still pretty new, and we always saw like, there's Fluentd and then there's Logstash. Every user that would come, even us as Microsoft at the time, we said, why don't we use Logstash versus Fluentd? And that comparison would come. I think Logs.io has a great comparison on their website about this. And at the time, we actually just extended Fluentd to start writing to Logstash. Yeah, it uses Lumberjack protocol. You want to write to it? Great. That's no problem whatsoever. And so I think of this extensibility being a key part, where folks who are using different agents, who might be using different protocols, yeah, let's extend to meet you where you are. These are vendor neutral projects, right? We don't necessarily care what backend, what agents, what type of libraries you're using, but let's give some first class representation to things like logs and metrics.
Yeah. I mean, there's still a lot of interesting stuff that they built into the beats that like the open source doesn't have anymore. So there's some of that for sure, like some random integrations to like Salesforce and Microsoft Office 365 and stuff like that definitely come up and people want to collect that data. But I think there's a lot that it does. I was really interested in the other thing is we do a lot of like lookups on our back end where the customer can import like a set of data and enrich their logs during ingestion, whether it's like looking for indicators of compromise in security use cases or integrating CMDB data or maybe data center location when you see IPs or host names. I mean, there's lots of use cases for like taking a log and then enriching it as it goes into the back end. But you're doing some of that also on the at the client side, so to speak, with Fluentd and Fluent Bit. Maybe you could talk a little bit about where you see the data enrichment going, because that's a really interesting topic in itself.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Data enrichment. Where should it go? What can you do now at the Fluentd and Fluent Bit layer? So this actually started maybe last year, late last year. We got this new GeoIP plugin for Fluent Bit. Fluentd has had a GeoIP plugin for a while. I think the typical way folks have done that is you look up against like a Maxmind database, which has a free version and a commercial product. And any incoming IP, you look up the city, the region, whatever it may be, and you can add that to your log message. And I think that's the most basic version. And recently this year, one of the areas besides logging that the Fluent ecosystem has been heading towards, or at least has been adopted, is in cybersecurity. We see a ton of folks who are capturing syslog data, they're capturing network data, they're capturing information and actually routing it to the security team versus just routing it to their operations team. And the use case for this checklist type plugin started to arise. And actually something we just released last week in 1.8.4 is essentially these very large defense ministries wanted this feature for saying, hey, how can we take these malicious IPs, these malicious domains, do a lookup in stream? So use case might be I have 1 million malicious IPs and domains, and I want to look up in stream. And if it is, just do something very simple. Do something like saying IOC is true, or add a record saying record equals bad, whatever it may be, but make that all customizable. And so the way we've been thinking about this is we have a lot of high performance with Fluent Bit at the edge. And for just a few more percentage of CPU, maybe a few more 100 megs of RAM, we can do a lot of these type of lookups. It doesn't do any action though, and I think this is where it's we're finding it really nice to be able to say, hey, we can help offload some of these tasks that you might typically be doing at a centralized location, or maybe even at a cloud location, do it a little faster at the edge. And then at the cloud side, you can take action. You can, this record will be generated, but at the cloud layer, you can actually alert on that. You can, have all these dashboards based off of it. So I think, there's definitely going to be this more meshing of, we're getting a lot more powerful at the edge. And I think it's always interesting to say, how can we start to use that? And security is definitely one of those interesting use cases.
Yeah, for sure. We see that as well. So do you foresee like a better way to manage that? Because today I'm assuming that there's a file and you just use the file and the user has to update the file and manage the file, and there's no kind of there is actually standard protocols, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Stix and Pixie, of like these threat data feeds that come in formatted a certain way, but do you have any like plans in the open source project to make that easier for users to like update those lookup, I guess, databases, files, whatever you want to call them?
Yeah. So we've been thinking a little about this more holistically. Fluent Bit is a bit static today. You deploy it, and once it's deployed, it's running that configuration. One of the new community projects that we just introduced to the Fluent organization is actually a Fluent Bit operator. And it has one main difference, which is these dynamic configuration reload, where it will take the incoming configuration change request and push it without causing downtime. And that's something we've always wanted in the Fluent Bit ecosystem. It exists in Fluentd. We have this live reload capability. And so as we define that and build that out more, it will absolutely go to these downstream systems or downstream plugins, whether it's you want to reload a exec script that you're running. Of course, we want to figure out a good way to do that securely. Or you want to reload some of the sources of data, right? Your files. Till is a great example. This is just taking a file that is constantly shifting and changing underneath. You might want to apply different parsers to it. You might want to extract data in a different way. So there's a ton of stuff that we're looking at around this dynamic flow of data and how do we adapt to it. So for specific threat feeds and others, probably to be determined, but for the dynamic reloadness of it, yes.
Yeah, and for those listening that aren't familiar, operators are a Kubernetes construct that is designed to allow the user to create a lifecycle for a particular component or service running on Kubernetes. So the idea is that with the operator, you define functions like upgrade, restart, like various things. You could update data feeds, for example, and it could be part of the operator. And then it deals with that life cycle and how you manage that, how you shut down gracefully, avoid dropping things. I mean, there's lots of things that you can do in an operator to make operations easier, which is why it's called that. So just a little background. It's part of Kubernetes standards. So so one other question I wanted to ask about intelligence on the edge, and we talked a little bit about what you wanted to do with parsing and moving more of that sophistication, I guess, closer to where the data is generated. Do you have other ideas around that same concept that maybe you wanted to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the stream processing piece, this is SQL you can write on top of Fluent Bit today. And some of the use cases that we typically hear is folks will say, hey, I'm reading from Apache and I don't actually need to send all my Apache logs. All I need to do is summarize how many 400, 500s, and 200s. And so you'll run a summary every 15 seconds, like a moving window. And because we somewhat format the data into JSON based off custom parsers, we can run these pretty sophisticated SQL queries on top of it today. Now, that's a very static operation today. You have to predefine your SQL query, define it as a task. And actually, we have a couple of branches that showcase live stream processing. And this is where you can go at the edge and say, add this stream processing query and show me the data. And it's something where it seems very simple, but one of the top questions we get in the community is like, I just want to check what my data looks like before it hits whatever backend it may be sending to. I just want to see what it looks like. And this is where a dynamic stream processing, while it sounds so posh and buzzwordy, this can help facilitate that problem. I can look at what my data looks like beforehand. Now, obviously, that hasn't reached the master branch because we want to ensure things like security, and it's just not an open port that anyone can say, "Show me the data" as an attacker. So as we look at bringing that into more and more Fluent Bit, we want to be able to say, "Hey, could you potentially do this type of query across 1,000 nodes and summarize it?" And it starts to meld the piece between large scale analytics in the back end and what type of analytics you want to do at the edge. But just starting to open those scenarios up to see how users react to it. I think the other, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to mention one thing. So to me, that seems like a metric use case. If I want to summarize how many 500s, 400s, 200s I've gotten, I would use a time series, right? Because then you can do all kinds of nice math on the data, but each to his own,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where we need to extend stream processing to work on top of metrics for sure. Because that should just become a Prometheus metric that you can scrape across all these nodes. Maybe you, instead of writing in SQL, you write it in PromQL. There's a ton of stuff here where we're really excited for, okay, we have these metrics and logs flowing. One use case we've been thinking is like, once you reach a certain threshold of a metric, can you tag logs with certain correlations to say, hey, this occurred with the following label of this metric, and help to make those analytic systems in the back end more efficient. How they can help determine root cause, etc.
So, have you played with exemplars to do that type of use case in Prometheus?
Not too much yet. Not too much. So.
That's kind of what it's designed to do, is give you an example of a log or a trace that has to do with a metric. And obviously you're not going to send all the logs. So it's like, here's a log that shows an error that looks like ABC, and that's the idea. So it's pretty powerful for getting an idea of why a metric is doing something. So it's a cool idea, but they're kind of stored in memory and not part of the back end. And it's a bit weird, but still a useful construct.
Yeah. And I think this is another area where, we do definitely lean on community as well to help drive what type of experience folks should have. And we definitely like to align with what users have been using in production today and what they need. I think if exemplars are the way that folks expect to experience this, let's please join the Fluent community. Tell us. We love to listen.
Cool. Other stuff that you wanted to cover on that last topic, because I kind of switched you off when you were going to go into another topic.
Oh yeah, I think the last bit there, again, falling a little bit into the buzzwordiness, is we did add a TensorFlow plugin, and this was maybe very early or late 2019, early 2020, and so this is another place where you can write like TensorFlow Lite. I should be more specific there. You can do things like classification. You point to your model and run it through. And we haven't taken too much advantage of this plugin, mainly because like there's 1,000 challenges before machine learning that we have to go solve. But for users who are interested, and if you're listening to this, like, oh, that would be cool to go try out. Yeah, that's another place where we could see intelligence at the edge, coming about and helping. Maybe we can identify some of the top types of logs, auto-categorize it. All these use cases have been talked about, but again, like I said, 1,000 things before machine learning.
There always is, but it's important to get there. No, that's cool. Yeah. So before we wrap up, any kind of like final comments before I talk about a couple of news items, and we can discuss those too?
No, I think, if folks have questions about the Fluent community, and we just reached 6,000 users in our Slack, so I'm really happy to see that. We're always looking for more engagement. We have our Fluent community meetings every month. We welcome anyone and everyone.
So, and There is a Slack. You have your own Slack, but there's also the CNCF Slack. So if you join the CNCF Slack, you're better off going to the slack.fluentd.org, which you can find on the main page, and sign up. But you can also discuss things on the CNCF Slack if you have questions or whatnot. But the community for the project Slack is probably preferred, I guess, right? So
definitely, we can get a little more specific about if you're running Kubernetes, Fluent Bit, Fluentd. But yeah, I hang out on the CNCF one as well, so it might be a little slower, but I try to be highly available or distributed.
yeah, that's cool. And so I did want to mention some conference news. First, two big open source conferences which are coming up soon. KubeCon is October 11th to 15th. It's hybrid right now. They're obviously monitoring the situation and will decide. The in-person is in LA. Anurag will be there. I will be there. Lots of people will be there if it goes forward. Within KubeCon, there's what's called co-located events. And so these are like mini conferences in the conference, and there are many interesting ones. One of them is FluentCon, which happens on October 12th during KubeCon. And so that's where you'll really be able to go deep, and Anurag will share a lot about the roadmap and things that are going on, and there should be some really interesting sessions. I'm actually going to be speaking about security there, just because I do believe that the security community is starting to get what's happening in observability, and there's signs of cross-pollination, I think, that are getting a bit better there. But the observability community, the DevOps community, and the security community are still very different, even though the data and the problems are very similar. So hopefully, we'll see more security folks getting involved in these other projects, and more DevOps folks having security responsibilities. But I think we're still a long ways from that reality. So I'm going to talk about how you use Fluentd and Fluent Bit in security use cases around SIEM and events, and should be a good talk. And Anurag, what are you talking about? Are you speaking at both conferences? What are kind of some of the topics you're going to be talking about?
Yeah, so as a maintainer, I'll be at KubeCon for sure. So if you have just general questions about the projects, if you have bugs, you can bring them there. I'll do my best to answer them. We can pull out the laptop virtually as well. There's a nice hangout area. And then at FluentCon, I'll be talking a little bit, as you mentioned, about the roadmap. But what I'm most excited for is actually a 1-hour workshop. So we're going to be pulling out our laptops, throwing Fluent Bit on some servers on your laptop, wherever it needs to go, and attaching it and learning about the metrics use cases. So this is meant to be a place where if you haven't heard about it or you're interested in learning about it, we'll walk through it. And of course, if you're joining virtually as well, we'll have a full GitHub repo you can go and look at for instructions.
Cool. Sounds interesting. And I'll also be at the Jaeger booth, and we're still figuring out the Jaeger talk because I work on Jaeger also, and there'll be other folks, of course, from other relevant to this event, Open Telemetry, Prometheus, and all of the Kubernetes ecosystem that's CNCF related. The one other conference I did want to mention that's kind of interesting is obviously one of the biggest conferences in the tech industry is reInvent, and that's happening November 29th to December 3rd, right now in person in Vegas. Obviously, this is all potentially up in the air. AWS did cancel Reinforce, which is their security conference, about a week before it occurred. It actually happened on Monday, the 24th of August, and they canceled it about a week before. So a lot of this stuff is very dynamic. People are kind of making a decision based on the current state of COVID in the world and locally. So hopefully we'll be able to get together safely, and it'll be nice to like actually hang out with people in open source in person again. But we're pretty used to working virtually, but getting together and discussing things in an informal manner is always, I mean, that's where great ideas come from, really. So, Anurag, anything else that you wanted to add in here?
No. I think I hope to see folks at KubeCon, FluentCon, whether you join in person or virtually. Otherwise, yeah, I'd love to see you join the Fluent community. So thanks so much for hosting me and having a great
thanks
talk.
a lot for joining and getting up so early in the West Coast for the live stream. And thanks people for listening. So we'll see you next month. We've got a great talk coming up that my colleague Dotan Horovitz is putting together with Yuri, who's the founder of Jaeger. Always great to hear from Yuri. He's always doing cool stuff. So definitely stay tuned next month. Subscribe on whatever your platform is. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Anurag, for joining us as well.
Awesome.
See you.